Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Fellowship in Essential Oils, where we're always learning brand new things about essential oils, including myself, because exactly 12 minutes ago, I realised that Allspice Essential Oil, which we're talking about today, is the same as Pimento Berry Essential Oil. And we often tell you to check the Latin names, and it wasn't until I looked at the Latin names that I put two and two together, came up with five, and realised I do know a little bit more about this oil that we're talking about today than I thought we were. I thought it was going to be the Elizabeth Ashley show today. But Elizabeth, how are you?
I'm feeling like it is going to be the Elizabeth Ashley oil because I love allspice oil and I've got so much to talk about with it. I will begin by saying that last week you said to me, I'm going to cut to the chase really. You said to me, is this an oil that we all want? And I sort of mocked a bit and I said, this is a daft question now. We've done so many videos and it's really unlikely that you're going to find an oil that we all like, that we all need now. And then you reminded me we were doing allspice, and I was like, made a fibber of me because this is an oil that we all need, I think. And yeah, I was similar to you actually. We'd had pimento berry in the naughty box, the box of hazardous oils, for a long, long time. And I've always thought, who in a right mind would use that oil? I know nothing about it. But then when I had to actually start writing about allspice for a company that sells it. I'll do a bit of a plug actually for Vine Vida. And then I did a really deep dive on it and I was like, whoa, I am never ever not going to use that oil. And here we are. So I really want to convert everybody to using this oil because this is an oil of our time.
I must admit, when you say, you did a deep dive and you really appreciated it, that's what I find the challenging thing about essential oils. I don't think I've found an essential oil that once I've really taken the time to get to know it, especially on a holistic and spiritual level, that there is room for every oil on the market, I believe. And do we need them all therapeutically? Probably not. The chemistry doubles up, but they all have their own unique personalities as well, which I really, really love. But I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm going to give you a task. Convince me and everyone who's listening and watching right now, what can we use it for our physicality and why do we need it in our collection?
Okay, so when I trained nearly 40 years ago now, scarily, you came away from your training thinking, I need tea tree for everything. And that kind of still is the same, but I believe now that we've had so many germs that have morphed that this one is a better way to use oils as a preventative medicine and as an emergency first aid. So the reason for that is because it's like clove bud on crack. So we get really excited about how much eugenol is in clove essential oil. I'm going to say clove essential oil, acknowledging that there is clove bud and clove leaf. Know that I mean clove bud every time I say it. In allspice oil or pimento berry oil, as you quite rightly say, 87% eugenol. So this is an absolute whack, right? The next largest constituency is around about 12% methyl eugenol. So that one's a more problematic constituent, and we'll talk about that later. But still, it's like a derivative or connected to eugenol. And then around about 6% is beta-caryophyllene. So are those of you who are, I can see you doing it, those of you who know chemistry are going, that's a powerhouse, that's a powerhouse, that's a powerhouse. And then we're looking at about 1% alpha-humulene. Which we're not going to get into alpha humulene today because there's too much to say about eugenol, but no, it's relaxing, right? That's all you need to know in the context of this. But why am I so excited about eugenol? Well, eugenol is such a powerful antiviral. It's such a powerful virucidal, and I'll talk about the differences of that. Well, it's such a powerful antibiotic. So it's antibacterial, so bacteria, viruses, both of them. Also, tremendously strong pain-killing abilities And beta caryophyllene also has painkiller abilities, anti-inflammatory immunity, and that is like the double whammy. So it's like almost 95% painkilling, anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, antibiotic, antiviral, the whole whammy. So what I am going to say right at the beginning is, as you can imagine, an oil with this much power is fierce. I mean, properly fierce. So we're talking tiny, tiny dilutions. You would only want to use 0.15% according to Tisserand and Young. So if you imagine like I don't know, I didn't do my homework, rollerball. I wanted to have a rollerball bottle in my hand. Forgot to do it. But that's not quite 2 drops of oil in a bottle of that carrier oil. So sort of 1 drop in that is powerful enough to do all of these things. So what are all of these things? So normally I wouldn't start by talking about COVID because it's makes it sound like I'm saying this will kill COVID. Far from it, right? But what we know about the COVID virus and what we know about eugenol and what it can do in a petri dish would always make me think, so every time somebody's going around me, I'm grabbing the allspice, right? So what we know about the COVID virus, the SARS, was it SARS-2-CoV or SARS-CoV-2 or whatever it is how it gets into the body and how it proliferates, right? So it has a protein, a spike protein that couples with receptors in our body. So do the most basic physiology. Our body works on an idea of locks and keys. In all of the cells we have receptors that are the locks, and they will do things if they're able to be opened by a key, which is a ligand. And in this case, the ACE2 receptor, which is on our lungs, our small intestines, our heart, and our blood vessels, so in a lot of places, and kidneys, sorry, it is opened by an indigenous ligand, so that means that it's in the body, but it can also be opened by the spike protein in the COVID virus. So it's called a S1 spike protein, and this spike protein has 2 parts to it, S1 and S2, and S1 actually is like intelligent in our systems, and it goes around searching for the receptors in the body that it can open, and then S2 actually will permeate and go through the cell membrane into the cell, and then it will replicate the COVID virus. So it replicates RNA, so it will duplicate itself. Suddenly there's 2, and then there's 4, and there's 8, and it's going all the way through your body. So we know that in a petri dish, eugenol stops the spike protein, stops S1's protein. So therefore, it can no longer search out those cells to be able to go into the body and to proliferate. And so this is a really, really powerful antiviral oil. It's also virucidal. So what's the difference? Because I struggle with this. So if you have if you're a bit like me and you're like, germs, stop the germs, like I've been after my husband's been in hospital, you're like bleaching everything in sight, you're using a virucidal, you're doing right, I don't want to pick up anything, right? An antiviral is what I described. Once it's in the system, stopping it spreading. So not only does it stop it spreading, but it stops you actually picking up the germ as well. So this is viruses. And if we think about all the different viruses there could be, coughs, colds, bronchitis, pneumonia, chickenpox, herpes, HIV, all viruses. And in the case of HIV, and actually we should say herpes as well, I'll talk about herpes in a minute. In the case of HIV, eugenol is being explored because of the way that it calms the proliferation of leukocytes, stops white blood cells going right through the body. In a petri dish, again, eugenol crushes HPV. So we can say herpes simplex, maybe genital herpes, but also cold sores, different versions of the same simplex. Chickenpox as well is also known to respond to eugenol. So these are powerful, and we haven't even got into antibiotic yet, right? So imagine that you're going into hospital. I spend my whole life thinking about people going into hospital and seeing what happens when you pick up something horrible in a hospital. The bugs in the hospitals, no matter how clean it is, are super bugs, right? They're so hard to get on top of. And of course, once they're in the ward, they go across the ward. So we really want to prevent that. And one of the most important, or let's go to actually, so the Pseudomonas aeruginosa, which is one that affects the lungs and also affects the urinary tract, particularly in old men. And it can lead to sepsis. Again, in a petri dish, a eugenol goes, kills it, absolutely kills it in 10 minutes flat. So this is properly powerful stuff. Also, staph infections. So staph infections can be on the skin, can be in the respiratory system. Again, if somebody's got an open wound, really serious stuff that goes incredibly nasty, incredibly smelly. Just the vapors will help to do that. And actually, I didn't open this the way that I had intended to, because one of the questions that I was going to ask you was, how do essential oils get into the bloodstream? So let's ask you that now. How do essential oils get into the bloodstream?
My guess would be there'd be several points of entry. They could soak through the skin.
Mm-hmm.
They could be breathed in and then through the lungs. Or if they're ingested, they could get in through that way as well.
Right. So let's address the last point. I would never say ingest essential oils anyway, but with this one, absolutely don't. It's so strong, you are really going to make yourself poorly, and it does degrade within the digestive system. So even if it was in a capsule, I think you would probably burn yourself. I haven't got the scientific evidence, but that's my feelings about it. So that we've talked about dilutions on the skin, but we haven't talked about breathing in. And I think that that is a really important aspect to look at, because we're talking about viruses that are particularly connected with the respiratory system and the upper and lower respiratory system. Ugh, my oil has been sitting and leaking. Put that down. I was going to sniff it. Incidentally, I will say that it smells heavenly. It smells like Christmas. But if you open your mouth and gasp, that will go, as you say, down into the lungs and through the capillary and the tiny little blood vessels in the lungs and into the blood system. So as well as using it on the skin, which is, you have to be so careful. You really want to be careful that you have diluted this enough, but gasping it really gets into the system, and it affects the emotional side as well. It's so uplifting, so fortifying, so happy. It really does make you feel fierce. So you can't sort of stress enough to you how good it would be to do that. So it's less sticky. To just do that a few times, get those oils down into your lungs. If you've got like a hospital appointment and you're going to visit someone, for example, you're walking into that situation and you've got a robust physiological system, but you're surrounded by the germs everywhere. A really good way to fortify. So that's the nasties in the system, but also then pain is really, really susceptible to eugenol. And I will clarify, by this I mean acute pain, not chronic pain. I wouldn't use it for chronic pain. So by the difference of that, I would say most of us know we use clove for toothache. You know, it's those pains that are sharp but actually not that long lasting. Chronic pain is, I've had backache now for 6 months and it's not getting better. That it's not that. But for acute pain where there has been an injury, and something's wrong and it's painful through the system, it can actually act through two different ways. So because it's a spice, because it's warming, heating, like fiery, really, it works on the same systems as chili does. So if we imagine how we put chili in the body, we go hot, we start looking red, we start sweating. That is a specific channel in the body that goes through the cells. It's called the TRPV1 channel. And its job is not only to transmit heat, but also it's a pain signaling receptor. And so we can switch that down. So if you get that, I've got a burning pain, it combats it. So Eugenol works on that level, but it also has in this allspice oil, in this pimento berry oil, it has beta caryophyllene, which works on it's a weak agonist for the CB2 receptor, which is on lymphatic and blood tissues right the way through our body, all the way through, and it mediates inflammation, immunity, and pain. So I cannot stress to you enough how important a molecule eugenol is. And if you wanted an oil that's pretty much all eugenol, this is your baby. And what's more is usually when you pick up these clinical oils, you think, oh, it's just disgusting smelling. But if you're English and you've eaten mince pies, that's what it smells like. That's the spice that's in mince pies. So it's just like immediately you're into this warm, happy, excited phase. And it feels like anticipation. Things are going to be exciting here, that is what it feels like. So if somebody is feeling melancholy, if somebody's got aches and pains and it's really dragging them down, it's absolutely fantastic oil in the small enough dilution in a massage oil, because it's like warming, it's exciting, it's so aphrodisiac. So all of those things, why would you not want to buy this oil?
So here we are. I think we're about to hit our 90th essential oil that we've talked about, and we've found another one that you're determined to have. So it opens up a few different questions for me. First of all, obviously, one of its main powers is that it's high in eugenol. Is there another essential oil in the world that has higher eugenol than allspice?
I don't know. Don't know the answer to
that. Okay, to the best of your knowledge, there may be.
I wouldn't go. Yeah, I wouldn't. I haven't gone looking for it, but I mean, 87%. Why would you bother? It's sitting on my desk in front of me.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's normally quite an affordable essential oil too, isn't it?
Cheap as chips.
Yep, love it. I love what you were saying about hospitals as well. Straight away, it shows the difference between your life and my life. I was thinking about aeroplanes or even public transport. Anywhere, yeah. I think anywhere where you feel the germs, or it was really funny. The weekend that's just passed, went out with a friend on Friday night who'd just come back from Indonesia, coughed her guts up. Do you know what I mean? She was being very respectful, and every time she'd cough, she'd cover, but you're like holding your breath all that time. And then caught up with another friend on Saturday who was all a bit coffee as well. And you're like, yeah. So I think it'd be great is that I love that technique that you showed as well. I was also reflecting on the difference between kind of your profession and my profession. As an aromatherapist, you're normally dealing with people once they've got a health issue and they come to you like, help me, fix me. Whereas I guess as a health educator, I'm working very much in the preventative domain a lot of the time, and how can we use essential oils to build up our systems? Do you think there would be an advantage, probably maybe making a bit of a blend, but using allspice pimento berry in the diffuser on a regular basis, especially when we've been out in germy kind of environments?
Yeah, and actually, especially if you have Like if your friend that sounds lovely but also quite infectious had been in my living room, as soon as she'd gone, I'd be putting the evaporator on, get those volatiles into my air, get clear that
Mm.
airspace. And likewise, if you work in a school or somewhere like that, you wouldn't want to be burning essential oils while the kids are there, because so many different types of reactions to individual reactions are all different, but as soon as the kids have gone out, clear the air, clear the space. And
Fumigate.
yeah, exactly. And I do use it here in the temple as well, to just just clarify the space all of the time, purify all of the time.
Yeah. Now, the final thing I wanted to bring up as well is I've got a bit of beef with you. Me
Oh,
and Debbie Ashby, one of Australia's
oh
greatest
no,
aromatherapists,
this is not
actually
going to be
just
good.
recorded and released our tea tree episode where we're talking about all the Australian essential oils month by month. And you said, allspice, why do you need tea tree when you've got allspice? Talk to me about the difference. Is there a crossover? Is there sometimes when you would reach for tea tree and not for allspice? Yeah. Or should I just throw my Australian tea tree out
No,
the window right now?
I mean, for a minute there, I thought, no, tea tree would be better as an antifungal, but no, Eugenol is a fierce antifungal. Do you know what? I don't actually think I've got a bottle of tea tree anymore.
Hmm.
I think I ran out and I just never replaced it.
I guess probably as a theme for tea tree, we always go kind of the main thing for tea tree is for skin. Any irritations, bites, scratches I've even found, with a bit of frankincense and lavender, that can help a little bit with bringing down the initial redness or irritation of eczema. Would you say maybe that's the advantage of tea tree, that it can be a bit more gentle and doesn't need such
Yeah,
a high
yeah,
dilution?
and yeah, that's a really good call, because you really want one for allspice on any skin that was broken.
Mm.
And it's really not a beauty oil. So tea tree is very good for like cleansing greasy skin and stuff like that, isn't it? And it's fearful, it's dreadful to say, but it is gentler. It is definitely gentler than allspice. Allspice is going to punch you in the face. The tea tree is much more sedate than that. And I definitely think that there's a place for both, but as you quite rightly say, if you'd scratched yourself, if the cat had scratched you, or you've got like cuts and abrasions, blisters that have broken, tea tree is absolutely fantastic for all of those things, isn't it? But allspice, I think, you'd be like, it hurts more than it did before, So there's definitely a place for both. And I also think that we shouldn't forget that this is my opinion, only my opinion, and also, everything about it is similar to my personality. The way that it's bubbly, the way it's sharp, the way it's very kind of pitta dosha. If you were quite somebody of quite a white, like what was I going to say then? A gentler, quieter disposition than me. If you have been ill for a long time, if you've got chronic pain, for example, you might. So actually, chronic pain is a good thing to say, because, as I said, we would use it for acute pain. We wouldn't use it for chronic pain, or I should say, work with it, not use it. We shouldn't work with it for chronic pain. But also, somebody who has chronic pain also has lots of other things going on. So they might get a blister, for example. And so their constitution might be a bit too like weak to cope with allspice. It's very stimulating. They might stop sleeping. Tea tree would be better for somebody who has that weak constitution, I think.
Got you. Well, you saved yourself, so I can, say that we will do another episode next week now.
Oh,
That's all
don't stop talking to me.
right. Now, you made a really interesting comment before that allspice punches you in the face. Last week when we were talking about cumin, I think I said, for me personally, I find, ginseng to be the number one masculine on the yin yang scale. Ginseng is the most. Cumin and ginger are number 2 and 3, but I would probably shove allspice or pimento berry all the way up on the yang scale as well. Would you?
She is very young. It is very young, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's quite a feminine oil, even though it is yang. So I'm trying to think. It's kind of like Sekhmet. Do you know what I mean? It's like wild,
Mm.
wild woman. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. I do like that for sure. Looking at it magically, I do find that any of those kind of warrior things or those kind of masculine pursuits, it's definitely a money. It's been used throughout the ages for money and abundance. It's been used for protection and definitely overcoming adversity. Almost like if you feel that you're threatened, it can be a really good one as well to kind of spritz around or guard yourself from that kind of impending doom. I would probably be kind of spritzing out my pimento berry out to shield me, but then working with something like a black spruce or a Douglas fir to actually help me as I cower inside in a kind of analogy in that type of way as well. But I think anytime we need that oomph of energy, it's used for healing. Again, on a metaphysical level, I would be using it when someone is feeling a bit lethargic and kind of almost not giving up hope, but like doesn't have that energy. I think it just brings up that drive, that pursuit, that motivation, and that strength that basically I get what I want and nothing's going to conquer me. It's kind of that pimento berry, allspice kind of energy. Would you agree?
Yeah, I do. And you know, it's a funny thing. Yes, well, today it's so cold. Yesterday it was unbelievably cold. It had been really beautiful over the weekend. It was t-shirts on when were out shopping. We woke up this morning and it's snowing outside. So it's very, very cold. And can't remember my point here. Oh yeah, and so when I was writing yesterday, I had to light the fire, and somehow I managed to get, because I am really clumsy, soot all up my arm, all up my arm. Now I went in the bath last night. I was in the bath for 3/4 of an hour, so I got the point of, will you get out the bath so I can go in? I've been in there a long time, but when I got this morning, I was like, there's still soot on my arm. How's that happened? So I thought that's really interesting, because I think that's probably Hestia speaking, saying, don't forget to mention me in the video, because it is that sense of warmth and comfort. But an aspect of Hestia that we don't often talk about is she was a pacifist. So you never see her involved in any of the arguments between the gods. She's always there, but she is heat. She's heat in there, and she's always at the meetings, but she's not getting involved. But the one thing that I notice every time that I have used or worked with Allspice over the past few weeks is I've started thinking about Athena. And I was really thinking about this a lot when I was watching poor President Zelensky getting attacked by Donald Trump. And I was thinking, we don't really have that hidden realm energy to call on anymore. But in times gone by, that is exactly when Athena would have been called upon to kind of balance the force of Mars with thinking, with strategical defense. And when you were saying about being attacked, that was exactly the sort of sensation I had, that like, if I was in there being Pitta Dosha, there's no way I wouldn't have got out of there without hitting him. There isn't a way. Being attacked like that, I would have reared up and I would have hit him. So that was massive, like, kudos to Mr. Zelensky that he did not do that. But also, I wouldn't have been able to think, what do I say? How do I, even doing it, I can't do it. Whereas Allspice is very good at saying, do this. Don't be afraid to do this. Get on with it. Just say that, And it's not about being inflammatory. It's about being hot enough without like exploding stuff.
It's really interesting that you brought up Vesta at this point in time because obviously we record a week earlier, but the week that this episode is coming out, Vesta is going into retrograde. So to kind of backtrack, and those that are loyalists, sorry if I'm repeating myself, but if you've just dropped into this episode, when we look at common astrology, you have pretty much all of the planets are masculine. The only feminine representations we have in traditional astrology is Venus, the lover, and the moon, the mother. And so, that kind of says that the real women archetypes are mothers and lovers. That's all they're good for. But as we've become more expansive in our world and expansive in astrology, we've identified and named other astrological bodies in our sky. Now, between Mars and Jupiter, so, closer to us than Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, is a big asteroid belt. And there are asteroids of all shapes and sizes. The biggest four actually carry the names of Juno, which is Hera, Zeus's wife. It is Ceres or Demeter. It is Pallas Athena, and you mentioned Athena, and then Vesta. So these are other feminine archetypes that are being represented and have a really key place in our astrology as we look at them in our birth chart and how those feminine aspects of us come out, but also when they go into retrograde. So, Vesta was, it's quite interesting. She's in a way a bit of a boring goddess because she wasn't in many myths, because where most of the myths came from was when there was arguments or conflict of some form. But she was a vital part. She was the goddess of the hearth, which is obviously that which kept the home warm. Not working at your home at the moment if it's -3 where you are, but she was very. She governed that fire in the home, but she also symbolized the one's inner fire. And it's really interesting how much I see people's Vesta energy get eliminated through life, especially mothers who start to dampen their flame for the care of their children and for the well-being of their family and that type of thing as well. So what we'll find around Vesta retrograde, and remember this is in the time also when Mercury is in retrograde in Pisces, so communication's all over the shop, very ambivalent and hard to kind of grasp what people are saying. And Venus is also in retrograde, meaning that everyone's feeling a little bit unloved at the moment. Vesta pops in and goes retrograde, taking her way of, I guess what comes up with Vesta retrograde is lessons around self-integrity and putting yourself first, doing what's right for you. And you'll find people go, you'll kind of decide, I'm going to have Sunday off and do a pamper day. And then you get a phone call Saturday night going, hey, can you help me tomorrow? And you get tested. And Vesta is very much about what do I need to do to keep malleable boundaries that allow me that my inner flame for my passions and my enthusiasm for life isn't dampened out because I'm giving just everything to everyone. So I think Pimento Berry, sorry, I keep on jumping between Pimento Berry and Allspice. I think this essential oil is a really great one to work with to maybe put up those defenses if you do feel that your boundaries are a little bit weak and you're just at the whim of other people's demands, and kind of work out how do I keep this inner fire. It's to do with passion. As you mentioned before, I'm sure you did say it's an aphrodisiac oil, and Vesta is associated with our inner fire for our libido, but also our inner fire for just our passion for what we love to do and our passion for life as well. So it's quite timely that this oil has waited until, way through the series of Fellowship in Essential Oils to pop up on this week.
We talked a bit about Vesta, didn't we, in Pink Pepper, because I was talking about the Vestal Virgins. And Vesta retrograde is taking me back to exactly the same thing that I talked about in Pink Pepper, about in AD 64, when there was this enormous fire through Rome. And the Vestal Virgins their job was to tend the sacred fire, and Vesta was Rome. And so the fact that Rome sort of erupted, and I still want to know, why was nobody blaming the Vestal Virgins? They only blamed the Emperor Nero because they said that he'd done it to burn the city down. And so that's always in my head. But Vesta is much more than what you said. She rules sacred service. So the Vestal Virgins were recruited at the age of around about between 6 and 13, and they remained celibate till they were after they'd done their 30 years tenure. And if they didn't remain celibate, then they were buried alive. So this is very much about, well, where is the sacred service in my life? And I do think that I actually wrote a blog post about this last week, that as Vesta transitions, I notice a lot of sort of people who have that feeling that they have been a priestess before have doubts. When you go into Vesta retrograde, you suddenly start doubting, am I being a bit silly about this? Or the other way can be that the old soul contracts really start to kind of suffocate you. And interestingly, we're at the Aromatic Mystery School. I'm running a course with a lady called Katie Holland, and she's a temple dancer, and this is what she specializes in, the sacred contracts. And one of the things we talk about is this sort of wave of teenagers and women, and but also lads in their 20s that have got this overwhelming thing of, I've got to save the earth, I've got to save the planet. And it's like it's an old soul contract that's really suffocating them. I've seen two young women who can't get off the settee because they're so overwhelmed with the planet's dying, you know. And Vesta retrograde can definitely do that, you know, because it's like suddenly you don't have that link to what was there in the past, and it's just suddenly overwhelming. Like, I have nothing there except this fearful doubt. And I wouldn't have thought about Allspice for that, but now, as you say, that can be useful for bringing that back through, of connecting yourself to that sacred service, of going, okay, I kind of understanding it again now. So yeah, interesting that you say that. For me, Hygeia, again, I was like this when I was working with Palmarosa. Hygeia really came in for me, goddess of preventative medicine. Yeah.
Interesting. And remember, Hygeia is another major asteroid in that asteroid belt. I will also note that there is Sekhmet is also a smaller asteroid that floats around as well. And sometimes I do wonder, when we think about all the different gods that are throughout the different belief systems and religions around the world, are they gods, or are they just the rocks in the sky that actually dictate our life in that way? There's something to ponder on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Yeah.
Yeah, so, funnily enough, that leads on to a video that I was going to do after I've got off with you. I was going to do another a video about what it is to be a priestess. And I see very much as, like, on the other side of that coin, there's a lot of people who will say, oh, well, you're such a goddess. And I'm like, no, because, all right, I might have that divine spark inside me, but the goddess is a huge force in the cosmos, you know. Yeah. And as you say, those movements of the planets and how the universe speaks to us through that isn't anything to do with, like, biology inside me. Yeah.
Very much so. Just on a slight tangent, I still have issue with anyone who names themselves or even pets after gods and goddess names. I've got to feel their sacred names. But that's just my little 2 cents worth. Sorry to all the people that I like my cat's name Athena. Yeah. Anyway.
I like you.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously with astrology, you know, when I came into this call, you know, you've kind of opened my mind now about, you know, I think I can see how Pimento Berry would be great for Sekhmet and Vesta. Really, really great. But we're often saying on this podcast that we're not right. And I'm going to point out not an error, but someone else who I have big faith in. One of my favorite authors, and probably one of the authors on this planet who's responsible for the mess that we're in with me, kind of thing, is Scott Cunningham. He has written amazing books. I think it was the book on The Guide for the Solitary Practitioner, Witchcraft, or Wicca, The Guide to the Solitary Practitioner, one of my very first magical books. And then I bought his crystal book. And another two I have in my collection that I always like to refer to about essential oils is Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs. So it's not just got essential oil producing plants, but many others, and Wicca in the Kitchen. So I was just having a quick flick through. Allspice appears in both. But he always puts his correspondences in here. In one, I think this one here, he links it to Mars, and in this one, he links it to Jupiter. So we all, I think we always claim that what we say isn't right. And you can even see that obviously in different phases of his career, he was like, actually, that my relationship with Allspice has changed. I think it might be more Jupiterian or it might be more Mars now as well. So we can work with it with any energy that we feel fitting, can't we?
I don't feel it as Jupiter at all, though.
No, I struggled with that as well, kind
I,
of
I
thing.
would, I would, I would dispute that. I definitely see Mars, but Jupiter is like, all right, it has some digestive qualities in medical astrologies, but it's not necessarily. It's about expansion. It's about higher thought. But this isn't really. It's about in a fire.
Yeah. I guess, in both he does comment that he also gives them an element, gives both the element of fire. So that's where Mars and fire works really well. He's playing a little bit more in this book with it's very good for abundance. So I guess maybe he's going like allspice is used for expansion in that way. But I'm still going to disagree with him, and I'll give him Mars, but I won't give him Jupiter.
Well, I agree, and but we should clarify actually that when you're doing that kind of work and you're working with correspondences, it's very much about the myth that you build into it. Well, you know that it's the intention that you're putting it into, isn't it? So he could obviously see a way that it would be useful for Jupiter, and each practitioner will use an oil differently.
Yeah, very much so. Now, when it comes to chakras, this is where I have spoken about pimento berry on that magical site. This for me is a base chakra one. I find it, we often think of base chakra oils as being quite, like a seed or vetiver that might ground you and settle you. But I find sometimes in order to feel safe, we need to stand up for ourselves and we need to have a bit of an oomph. And so I find I would use pimento berry in that respect as like, staking a claim, stating what you're willing to put up with and what you're not willing to put up with, and being in control of your own safety rather than just finding a safe place to hide. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I would put it with two different chakras. One's easy to understand, one's not so easy to understand. I agree with the root chakra, but I would go one up.
Mm-hmm.
So the sacral chakra is, or let's say the root chakra is about this is what I need. The sacral chakra is about this is what I want. This is what I wish for. And so for me, that would be preventative medicine. That would also be desire. And also from the point of view of, like we talked about, how it protects against urinary diseases. It's got this aphrodisiac quality, that sort of lower chakra of like explosive fire. But also, you talked about Venus retrograde. We have kind of two heart chakras, don't we? We have like our own heart chakra, but we also have one further out, which connects us to the cosmic heart, if you like. This is what works with community of sending healing to people. To me, I think it would act upon this chakra, this communal sacred fire.
You did mention just in passing as we wrap up a little bit about libido. Is for around Valentine's Day, I was doing some education about oils for sexual health and sexual well-being on all different levels. It's really interesting. It's not really something that's discussed that much, but pimento berry wasn't one that I actually had in my kind of range. Would in sexual health, frigidity, confidence, all those type of things, would it be a good one in there? I know it's probably its mainstay is immunity, but sexual health?
Yeah. And define sexual health, because I've already talked about how herpes, HIV, but that sort of desire, I think, rather than it being one that is for poor libido, I would say it was more for I can't receive pleasure, but also we've been married 25 years and this is the same as it was last year. Do you know what I mean? There's no surprises here. And, that kind of, whoop, this is a bit different. I think it's that rather than I've lost my libido. If lost my libido would be nutmeg, as in my opinion, always because it supports the pituitary gland so well. Um, so I don't think it has necessarily those kind of direct actions on the physiology of sex, but I do think on the mental aspect, yes, it does.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, cool. Yeah, there's lots to dive into this one for sure. I was just going to say as well, something that if people have been married for 25 years and they've lost that sexual spark, one interesting aspect of Vesta in your birth chart, it kind of does give an indication of what lights your fires or what turns you on. So looking up your Vesta position in your birth chart and your partner's could just be an interesting conversation that might get new things sparking there as well, kind of thing.
For
Well,
sure.
yeah. Well, we've talked about how amazing this oil is. Liz has decimated the use of and the tea tree industry in
My
Australia, and then I've helped to resurrect it again because it does have its uses. We've worked
friend.
out it is an oil you need. We've worked out our planetary. We've worked out our base chakra and our sacral chakra. I think we're all sorted for this week, aren't we, Liz?
I think we are. Just to give a plug, actually, to the course that I was talking about, if anybody is interested in finding out more about the soul contracts and sacred dance with blue lotus is what the course is called, hop on over to my link tree and it'll take you to the events that we're running. And we have an introductory session with the sacred dance and blue lotus on the 22nd of March, so it's creeping up.
Awesome. Check that out. The links will be below wherever you're listening or watching this. Until next week, take care and blessed be.
Bye bye.